Hi, I hope you had a great weekend, and I'm happy to be together again for another week. Coming up here, we're going to start talking more about attachment. And when you think about attachment, I really came to believe that it's that social bond and that attachment comes before anything when it comes to child development. So before a student can learn or practice memory strategies or do other types of things that we associate with, developing as a child, they need to have that attachment. Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby are two of the major figures that are discussed as far as historically people that have studied attachment a lot. When infants were placed in this, it's called the strange situation with Mary Ainsworth. It was a situation where they were in what looked like a waiting room, and the mom, after a little bit, left the baby there. And it's interesting that it's called a strange situation. I think strange in that the infant hadn't been there, of course, prior, but it's really a common situation. Babies are left at church childcare or with a new babysitter or in a new school, often by their parents. But it's certainly disconcerting and brings about some fear and some anxiety for children. So what they discovered was that children typically, although not always, but typically fell into three different categories. One was securely attached, and this was where when the mother left, the baby became very anxious and upset and was hard to soothe for a while. But when the mother came back, that baby was able to calm quite well and quite quickly. The second type, and that was about 65% of babies. The second type was, there's two different types that were referred to as insecure attachment. And some texts talk about how that term has a lot of judgment to it, and I'll come back to that concept in a moment. But the next category was avoidant, and so these babies would then as it sounds, avoid the mother when she came back and kind of act indifferent to her. And then the last type, and that was closer to 25%, the last type was closer to 15% of all babies, and they were anxious ambivalent, and so they would be very clingy and sometimes kind of push away, but definitely have a lot of showing of anxiety even when the mother returned. Now notice that I keep saying mother as well, and so we're going to see this historically in child development. Mothers got all the blame and all the glory, mostly just all the blame though. And, that was a big focus of this research. It's not a coincidence. That was for several reasons. One, certainly mothers were often the primary caregivers, but also we have to always look at the historical era and when this research started coming out, just like the research today, right? Research comes out when society is maybe ready or wants a particular focus area, and researchers get funded based on what type of research is being looked for as well. And a lot of this research first started during World War II. Now we have to think back in history and in time there, a lot of mothers, white middle-class mothers, started working outside the home for the first time, and that was due to necessity, where so many men were gone and enlisted that they needed women to work on the farms and work out in business industry. And so women were out and working. When the war was over, the push was to get those mothers back to the home, and there was a lot of research and a lot of public figures that were talking about the detriment it would cause children not to have their mothers at home. And this is when the research first started coming out. So I think it is important to know that. It doesn't mean the research isn't valuable. It's been tested and researched beyond mothers since then and across different cultures, and these similar patterns have occurred. But it is very interesting, and maybe more than a little interesting, to note that that's where it came out of. One of the things that has been discussed is that idea that that word insecure attachment, if any of us as adults might feel that that we've had that insecure attachment and maybe that's caused problems throughout life, it's a harsh term, and I think something a bit more positive and also realistic as far as terminology goes, is to know that it was an adaptive response. So if I'm in an environment where parents or caregivers are not responding to me, or they might even be responding in a very harsh or angry way, when I act upset with them or upset upon their return, I'm going to adapt. I'm going to learn, hey, if I want to survive and hopefully thrive to the best of my capability in this environment, then I need to act calm on the exterior. I need to act okay on the exterior. And I've seen that with very, very little children where clearly they have had a trauma and they act okay on the outside, even though you know on the inside that their hearts and their heads are feeling that pain. So it was adaptive. And there's lots of things that were adaptive that the problem becomes not at the time, because at the time that was what was psychologically healthy and adaptive. But remember when Jean Piaget talked about as well that we form schemas or thinking models about what the world is and how the world works and how relationships work. The problem is that once we have that schema or that idea, it takes a while usually for us to break out of that idea or get to a new idea. So it can be hard because we can work on models that worked for us as children that no longer work for us now. The great news is that there are, we can earn a secure attachment later. And so Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel is someone that we can talk about a bit as well. And just know that research has happened and is continuing to happen related to how we can break through those older schemas and models and get to a new understanding and a new healthier way of attaching. Now, when we think about what that means for us as counselors or as teachers or as parents or as caregivers, we know that relationships are key before anything else. So when we're starting to teach or starting to counsel, we need to slowly develop that trust and that relationship. Dr. Glasser of Reality Therapy talks about love and belonging being like the cornerstone need. So what can we do to make sure that children can learn that love and belonging? A lot of research on triumph over adversity has looked at that idea. They've asked people that have gone through horrible things as children, how did you end up being successful? What was the key there? And they will bring up typically more than one, but sometimes it's just one person that was key and that was consistent and that was trusting and that was loving. And so we can be that person, and that's the great news. And hopefully bring about connections where they can have more someones that they can also grow to rely on and trust. So continue thinking about ways that you can help to develop that attachment for children that might be in an environment where they can't, due to any number of reasons, they can't securely attach because maybe they're not in an environment with their primary caregivers where that is adaptive for them, and how we can help them to develop that later in our role with them. Again, I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I hope you have a good next few days. Thank you.